Well, welcome back. Today, the country commemorates Human Rights Day, and the official celebrations will be held in Koster in the Northwest Province under the theme, The Year of Unity and Renewal, Protecting and Preserving Our Human Rights Gains. Now, the day is historically linked to what went on to be known as the Sharpeville Massacre, where 69 people died and 189 were injured when police opened fire on those protesting against past laws. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to deliver the keynote speech at the event at the Reagile Sports grounds in Koster. And the day also honors those who made sacrifices in the struggle for the realization of democracy in South Africa and highlights the importance of liberation and human rights guaranteed in the Constitution. And while there's no disagreement on the underpinning hallmarks of freedom to include a free, united, non-racial, non-sexist, and socially cohesive and economically liberated society, writings have shown that South Africa is further and further away from that dream. Now, Foundation for Human Rights Executive Director Hanif Vally joins us now for a discussion on these matters. Mr. Vally, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, as the remembrance of this day provides the country an opportunity to reflect, how much progress would you say has been made in the promotion, and to the protection of human rights in South Africa?
You know, in terms of promotion and protection, we're not doing too badly. In terms of achievement, we're doing very poorly. You know, it's promotion, respect, as well as achievement of human rights. And one of the unique features of our Constitution was that socio-economic rights was not aspirational. You know, right to food, right to water, right to shelter. They were not just aspirational. We were supposed to have achieved them, of course, with certain conditions. And there we failed very, very poorly.
So when we look at the underpinning hallmarks of these rights, when we talk about a united, non-racial, non-sexist, socially cohesive, economically liberated society, what's your perspective on how we're faring on that score?
Where we are lacking is the delivery of very basic services. The whole notion of apartheid was your status was determined by your race or your origin from Europe. We try to do away with this by breaking this generational poverty that people have been inherited. And we haven't been as successful as we could have been. A lot of it has to do with the looting of state coffers. With the behavior of people in power, both the party in power as well as some of the opposition parties, where banks are looted, which was supposed to use the money for services for the poorest of the poor. We also have a problem with our democracy in a sense that it's not fully functional. Why is it that one party conference with a few thousand people, and there's lots of talks of money being exchanged, etc., determines the future for our whole country? Why is it, and the figure I've heard mentioned is 1.5 trillion rand has been stolen through corruption? Why is it that we're not recovering this money? We just had the Commission of Inquiry. How many people are being, in fact, prosecuted for that? We just had a situation where there were contrived riots in parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. Where are the prosecutions? People are gleeful about what they've done and damaged our country. They have no shame. So it's the accountability. You know, you cannot have human rights without rule of law. And that's where we're lacking.
So if we look at the envisaged liberation that many have paid the ultimate price for, and we go through our list of struggle stalwarts, the likes of Tambo, Sobukwe, Hani, and the list is endless. If we look at what was envisaged and what was said about the liberty of South Africa and what it would mean to the people of South Africa, if we look at that and we look at where we are now, without especially economic emancipation for millions of South Africans still. And sadly, if you look at the World Bank reports, it says that the country is the most unequal society in the world, high levels of unemployment, high levels of poverty, too many people dependent on social grants. Why is this government failing to create economic opportunities, especially for its people?
In fact, it's quite disgraceful. It's quite shameful that we haven't delivered for majority of the people who come from generations of purposefully being impoverished under apartheid, under colonialism, through slavery, etc. First of all, the system that was employed wasn't effective. They use this neoliberal system, which is there to enrich the very rich. Secondly, you have a situation where the lack of accountability, the institutions which should have held people accountable, like the Chapter 9 institutions and the NPA, were in fact effectively undermined. Where they were working like SARS, they were also then purposely undermined so they could be theft and looting. And this is across the board. This is, not only the ruling political party, but the minority parties with just 10% support were implicated in looting of the VBS bank. And remember, it's not victimless crimes, these. When this money is stolen, it's coming from the services which should be delivered to the people in this country who suffered the most under apartheid. Now, if you use what they call the capability thesis, that if people have education, health, housing, they will take themselves out of poverty. This is the Amartya Sen thesis, capability thesis. So how are people able to take themselves out of poverty when these very basic rights that people are entitled to are in fact not being delivered because someone without any shame has stolen the money and refuses to return it?
Mr. Vally, if you look at the question of emancipation and liberation and the land question, so we saw what happened in Parliament last year where there was a start and then somehow it seemed to have been derailed, this question. But ultimately something was done, something was discussed, whether people agreed with how it ultimately panned out. I suppose these are the functions of democracy. But if you go back to the PAC slogan, for example, Izweletu, our land, the land is ours. Again, why has it been so difficult for the government under the leadership of the ANC to tackle this question that was also central to the struggle for freedom and liberation in this country, the land question?
What you say is so crucial. We always saw the land as being at the very core of the struggle in this country. How can you have 85% of the people restricted to 13% of the land by an edict, by an illegitimate colonial imposter? So this was recognized. This was recognized when the Constitution was drafted. And the Constitution is quite clear on the processes that need to take place. Because you have to take into account how the land was acquired, you have to take into account how the land was enriched, etc., etc. Despite that and the whole argument, the whole debate that was taking place was simply, is Section 25 sufficient for us to legitimately and justifiably restore land to majority of the people? And the very good arguments on both sides. Having said so, it's a bureaucracy in between. The fact that they couldn't roll it out, in spite of having this national land claims commissioners, provincial land claims commissioners, they always seem to be stuttering along and not being very effective. Our land claims court, in fact, didn't in any way cover itself in glory as well. So the institutions that were put into place to try and restore the land, the Constitution has got the provisions. This has not been implemented. And we have a defective political system in our country where our core democracy is being undermined. How can we have a situation where one party's Congress with a few hundred people, and there's lots of talk about lots of bribery taking place, etc., determines the future for 53 million people? So this is part of the problem. What would be interesting is to do an audit to see how many members of parliament, in fact, were given large plots of ground, large plots of land, as compared to the people who need it on the road, who need it in the rural areas, and make that comparison.
So just a final question, as we commemorate Human Rights Day today, led by government, and each year there's a theme along the lines of bolstering social cohesion. Now, there's something, a bit of a conundrum, it would seem, because we always seem to find ourselves in situations where we're dealing with xenophobia, Afrophobia, racism, all sorts of issues, the question of a national identity. So other than government saying these things, what could really be done in real practical terms to actually get us somewhere towards achieving what is envisioned in the Constitution?
I think it's a narrative that we have to keep fighting for. On a defensive level, we have a situation where the human rights are in fact subjecting power to law. So we need it from a defensive point of view, but from a proactive point of view, ours was one of the few societies which had within its constitution socioeconomic rights envisaged to be justiciable, that you could go to court and try and achieve them. And what we need to do is to hold this government to account, make sure that our democracy works, make sure that our democracy is not being subverted, make sure that people who've stolen from us are held accountable, and make sure that the money is recouped. We cannot throw away our constitution. There will be people who will try and undermine it, but there will be no protection against an abuse of power if we do.
Well, we'll leave it there, but thank you so much for your time this morning, Foundation for Human Rights Executive Director Hanif Vally on Human Rights Day in South Africa. Let's hand you over to Leanne now with